Society isn't designed to benefit neurotypical people, but to control them.
What if it's neither? What if there is no design? What if it's just blind sociological forces colliding with each other over and over again, like prion synthesis, a broken protein hitting a broken protein again and again and again? The thing is, prion fission looks a lot like a virus or bacteriological proliferation. You have these teeny tiny things replicating in a consistent way over and over again, and it looks like it's alive, but it's not. It's just a broken protein that, when it hits other proteins, breaks them in a similar way. Now, what if human history got hit in the right way at the right time to start this process? A spreading wave of social reorganization around aggregation of power that lent itself to very particular expressions of power, created an environment in which certain kinds of power are more likely to replicate. It certainly creates an environment where some processes are going to be more successful than others. Some survival strategies are going to be more successful than others. But there's no control. Don't get me wrong. I like the message that neuronormative folks, neurotypical folks, are also damaged by this system. They absolutely are. But if there's a design, then there's a designer. There's a design process. And there is a mechanism by which designs get implemented. There's the implication that the mechanisms of reform are built into the machine itself. I really wish that was true, but it's not. What we're trying to do is much harder. Nature didn't position us as a neurological minority among honestly, that raises the question of what the intent behind neurotypicality was to begin with. If we are intended, so are they. Nor, for that matter, do we necessarily know that the population distribution of the respective neurotypes that we encounter today is constant throughout history or by region. Quite the contrary. I think there's a fair bit of historical evidence that there has been regional variation in relative density of neurodivergence, certainly in terms of cultural influence. I think a series of events occurred in such fashion as to allow a society to break in a particular way that it could replicate the shape of that breaking wherever it reached, and that it was built upon a series of other events which allowed that replicative or fission process to go unchecked long enough for it to exceed the bounds of its resource pool and thus necessitate, if you will, contamination of adjacent ecologies. I think the methodology began with a very particular set of arrangements of and juxtapositions of military organization, tactics, resource acquisition, resource distribution within that society, placed within a certain socio-historic context. I think that most of what we know about the indigenous peoples of Europe was written down by a military leader who was primarily concerned with their eradication, and that this person, not too much later, became the first person of his country to be vested with absolute executive authority, and when asked to relinquish it, refused to do so. I think that that event broke things in a way that made it possible for that style of breaking to be replicated. I think it was further bolstered by the impression of sociocultural innateness of encountering similar mythopoetic forms in differing peoples that were conquered by that nation state, largely ignorant of the long-lasting influence of a prior conqueror's attempt to not so much eradicate the cultures that he conquered as to seed them with his own sociocultural biases. Thus, a later conqueror finds distorted reflections of themselves all over the world as they see it, and believe that this is a reflection of some innate human characteristic that they themselves are the idealized embodiment of, rather than recognizing that they are the inheritors of a prior conquest, interpreting the entirety of history through that broken lens has created ideas that were entirely too easy to carry forward. And when that nation state had run as far as it could, it transferred most of that model into a burgeoning ideological organization, and thus transcend the boundaries of the nation state itself. I think that erroneous discovery, the false discovery of that innateness, colored the thinking of people who later would be entirely consumed with the process of understanding the world around them, but again doing so with this preference, this bias toward a belief that what they were uncovering was intrinsic, was innate, and that they, as observers, were revealing the true and hidden nature of things, and in so doing regard themselves as the ultimate embodiment of that nature's internal ambitions, which very conveniently mimicked the character, inflection, and cadence of their own. As the power of theological institutions and the monarchies that they ratified gradually eroded, and the power of the mercantile class rose, I think the same model jumped over into that. It's tempting to lean into the metaphor of hunting a body-jumping demon through history, but really it's just protein fission. Things breaking in a particular way that the fragments cause similar breakage.